As a baseline, what should New Zealanders expect from the public service?
I think as a baseline, New Zealanders should expect good efficiency, good quality and good value for money. And that's, it is their investment that we spend every day, and there's a duty of care in that. And I think the public service should represent that every time they deliver a service.
What works well and what doesn't?
I think what works really well, based on the analysis that I've seen, is actually New Zealanders do trust the public service. They do deliver when they need to, and they're very good at it. The point that I would raise is we're not as good as we can and should be for the future. We're not as future orientated. We're not as well prepared for the future as we need to be. And so although the system has served us really well and continues to serve us really well, we have to make change. We have to adopt greater use of technology. We have to use our data more efficiently, and we have to use AI to speed up the quality of our decision making.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about some of that detail in a couple of minutes. Why would someone like you want this job?
I ask myself that every day, as my wife asks me. I want this job because I think I can make a difference. I was asked to do this job. I was seen as having a set of skills that people needed. I'm happy to do it for as long as I can, which is, through to 2027, and I will make as much difference as I can in that time.
You think your appointment is an experiment of sorts?
I like to think that as a very controlled experiment. It was not a hand grenade to disrupt the system. I'm familiar with the system, but I'm not of the system.
Right.
So hugely respectful of the people I work with. I continue to be really impressed by the quality of the people in the public sector. What worries me is the systems that support them are not, as I said earlier, fit for purpose, and we need to change that.
Coming from the outside then, with that outsider's perspective, although understanding elements of the system already, what has surprised you in the months that you've been in the role so far?
The thing that surprises me is the people make the difference. They work despite the system, and they do great things. As we're talking today, there'll be public servants delivering for the New Zealand public that we should be proud of. So it works because of the people, and we need to liberate the people to get them to be able to do more. We need to delegate more, and I think we need to become less orientated at risk.
All right, there's been a lot of discussion about the size of the public service and whether or not the size and investment that's going into the public service right now necessarily matches the outcome. So as the government today is fond of noting, the core public service grew 34% between 2017 and 2023. In your view, did services improve by a relative quantity?
I don't think so, and that is a problem. We're not the only one. I don't know whether you follow Sir Keir Starmer. He's made exactly the same point. Public sectors across the world are spending more money, but there's a sense we're getting less for it. And I've got some work underway to try and reconcile why did it go up by so much, and there are very good reasons to do with inflation and demand and all of those things. But I don't have an answer that I feel personally comfortable with at this point that is evidence-based.
When do you think you'll have that?
I would hope in the next 2 to 3 months, because I think without understanding the problem, it's hard to get the solution.
RNZ records 9,500 job cuts so far in the public service since this government took over. Do you accept that that has and or will impact services and outcomes?
I'm not sure that's the correct number, actually, because I'm told it's 2,000. Right. So leaving aside the number, the principle is there has been retrenchment. That retrenchment was required and it will continue. I'd love to guarantee everyone their job. I don't know an industry in New Zealand that is able to do that in good faith. So I think what we need to do is find what is the operating model that will best serve New Zealand taxpayers in the future, and transition and migrate as soon as we practically can.
Right, to that question though, do you accept that retrenchment, the process of retrenchment, either has already or will impact the services that New Zealanders get from the public service?
I don't accept that as an article of faith. I think there will be individual cases where that may be true, but I don't believe that to be true as a generalisation.
Are you in a position yet to state, envisaging the broad framework of a future model as a percentage of the overall workforce to fulfil those services as you think they should be fulfilled? Should the public service workforce be greater than, smaller than, or about the same as it is now?
I don't have the answer to that. That's the work that we're doing. But what we do need is actually to use our resources as wisely and as prudently as we can. I think delivering value for the taxpayer is what we should be focused on.
What about wages then? Should wages be higher, lower, or about the same as where they are, or relative to the private sector? Should they increase or decrease?
Wages will move according to sort of inflation and negotiation. That's just a matter of bargaining. And, within the public sector, there's a lot of live bargaining. The outcome of those will be the outcome. We have to deal with that reality, but we can't underpay people. I think, underpaying people leads to very poor outcomes.
Let's talk about some of those changes then. You've talked about the role of technology. The Minister has said that AI is key when it comes to having a more efficient public service. What do you envisage?
AI is going to be a hugely important thing for New Zealand. We're still at the early stages. We do use it in some things, but it's more of by exception. What I think she means and what I'm supporting is that we need to have that as the way we do business, and we need to change the language and not be fearful of these tools. They will definitely improve the quality and they will definitely improve the speed. If I look at other countries, particularly Singapore, in some of the states in Australia, we are falling behind in our adoption of technology. And, our public administration, which used to be the envy of the world, is no longer. We need to change that.
Can you give us a concrete example of how those tools might be utilised?
If I think, as an example, the Customs have a vast amount of information on various shipments of people, movements, background connected to our Five Eyes. They use that information to target incoming drugs. They do that really, really well. And, I had the privilege of sitting in their room a few weeks ago and observing it. That's real-time use of data, real-time use of AI and intelligence, and applying that to well-targeted decisions and resource. I think, those sorts of things make a difference to how New Zealand operates and the security and safety. Right. That is a good example.
So why has Customs been able to use that and perhaps other departments or entities haven't introduced the same levels of technology?
Yeah, that is a really tricky question and one that occupies my mind. I think it comes down to the leadership of the chief executives. As I said earlier, people make a difference, and some people are just actually more curious and more wanting change than some others. I would like, the whole concept of curiosity to become an article of faith in the New Zealand Public Service. We should always be questioning why we do it and whether we could do it better. That's what the private sector does. I can't see why the public sector can't adopt that.
If data is critical to a more efficient public service in the future, why should New Zealanders trust the government to keep their information safe? I mean, your own people have been in charge of an investigation into Statistics New Zealand, for example, with relation Manurewa Marae, and clearly there have been some real concerns over data and information in that instance. Why would the future be any different?
The future has to be different. It's an article of faith that we, as the public sector, have to have the confidence and trust of the New Zealand public. We already have a lot of the information, but that example you gave, that was sobering. When I read those reports, as a citizen, I thought this is not good enough, and that's why we did what we did. So that is the thing that we have to constantly work for. But the Inland Revenue, Ministry of Health, we have a lot of data and it's very, very sensitive, and I think there's an extraordinary duty of care that citizens can have confidence in us, and we have to do that without fear or favour.
You said that the public service at times has been too risk-adverse. And you noted in a speech to the New Zealand Economics Forum this year, quote, "The risk of doing nothing is often greater than the risk of action, so we need to go from avoiding risk to proactively managing it." I suppose if you flip that around, might public servants not argue at times that avoiding risk means avoiding potentially wasting taxpayer money?
Yeah, it's a complicated thing. My comments are based around the sense that we have a lot of architecture which is about managing risk. We have a lot of interdepartmental meetings. We have a very high-touch consultation model. Those are all good, but they have to be kept in measure. So my point is, if we focused as much on creating value as we did on managing risk, we would have a different economy. The public sector represents an enormous part of our economy, and it has to be comparable to the private sector in terms of its productivity, and I don't think we are there yet.
Can you recall a specific example where you think the public service has been too risk adverse and has perhaps missed an opportunity?
No, but I do get a general sense that we circle the problem for another look at it, and we go to the 99th percentile of confidence. Life is about trade-offs. When I mention risk, I don't mean frivolous. I just think we need to just accept that risk is a fact of life, and everything you do has a risk, because I would argue that the risk of not doing it is far greater at times. But we don't cost that and we don't value it, and that slows the economy down, and we all pay that.
Is Wellington a bubble?
It is a bubble, which is why I try and spend as much time as I can out of it, because as much as I love Wellington, it isn't the only worldview. And I personally get really sort of much more energised when I'm out talking to frontline staff members. You know, Wellington is synonymous with the public sector. Only 45% of the public service are based in Wellington. The majority is outside.
You're talking about the core public service?
The core public sector, because the core public service is 63,000. The whole public service is in the vicinity of 480,000. You know, so this is a very, very big algorithm with a lot of moving parts. So yeah, Wellington is important, but we need to get the balance right between where the thinking is done and where the work actually gets delivered. And I don't think we've always got that right.
So how do you change that?
I would like to see greater devolution to regional New Zealand. I think, you know, we've got great people. They're the ones that make the difference every day. We should trust them and empower them to do more.
Why wouldn't we do that?
There just seems to be an answer which that's not the way we do it.
From who?
From people in Wellington mainly. But I mean, the thing is that this is part of the controlled experiment.
Yeah.
Let's try some things. You know, innovation is key to the performance of business.
Yeah.
We need to adopt the same sort of principles. But in doing that, we have to be prudent with money, and we have to be accountable for money.
I want to talk about political neutrality. I think at least 8 members or 8 leaders of public service agencies directly under your purview have left their roles since the new government came into power, and there are a variety of stated reasons, including things like medical conditions and that kind of thing.
Yep.
But would you accept that that's an abnormally high number?
I don't think it's abnormally high. I just think it reflects contractual cycles and change. The politicisation of New Zealand's public service is something that we remain very diligent on. And, you know, it's actually talked about more, and it's not in reality, my experience of it being politicised. I think, you know,
so explain that. So I'm confused what you mean.
We are not as politicised as some would have you believe. In fact, right. I think we're very neutral, as we should be. Constitutionally, that's an important article for New Zealand. So it's something that we have to remain alert to, but I don't see any particular examples of it at all.
Well, why does it matter? Why does political neutrality in the public service matter?
I think the public deserve to know that they have an independent group of people who serve the government of the day. That's the article of faith under the Act that I'm responsible for, and that is one that we will deliver to the best of my ability.
But is that an appropriate model for this day and age?
I think so.
Right.
It works well. It has stood the test of time, and the quality of people that we're able to attract are still very good, and they serve without fear or favour the masters of the day.
In February, Judith Collins made a fascinating speech upon assuming her ministerial responsibility, in which she hit on this point, and she said, quote, "Public servants who speak truth to power by telling ministers their pet policy ideas are crazy and unworkable don't get far. But neither do public servants who nod along and promise to deliver the undeliverable. That's a betrayal of the responsibilities of a public servant and results in policy disaster." Do you agree with that?
Yeah. You need a certain character to be able to tell something that they don't want to hear, and I'm sure we've all had experiences of that. So that's how you get the confidence and trust of the political masters, is you tell them what they need to hear, but you do have to do it in a way which makes sense and which has political context. That is the reality of their world. And so I don't think that compromises independence at all.
Dare I ask them, what is the most significant pushback you've given?
I haven't had many, to be honest, because, you know, we're going through a process. I haven't had to ever put something forward that has been rejected.
As it stands, are public sector chief executives too easily reappointed?
I think there has been a little bit of experience before I got there, by the way, of people being rotated through jobs without perhaps due scrutiny. That's going to be addressed in the changes to the Act, where after a 5-year term or a 3-year term, that there is a process where people get re-scrutinised and compared to the market. I think that's healthy for them and it's healthy for the system.
Right. How has that been allowed to happen?
It's sort of, I think it's just happened. It's not something that I personally support. I would rather that people go through contestable processes. I think it's good for them, and you're getting the best. And the article of making sure that we do merit-based is a non-negotiable as well.
I'll ask you about the merit-based process in a moment. Do you think politicians in New Zealand should have a greater say when it comes to the appointment of those leadership roles?
They have a significant say already. They sign off the job description. They get access to the long list of candidates. They get access to the short list of candidates. So their voice is heard.
And that's sufficient in your view?
I believe it to be sufficient.
If they were given greater powers to nix a candidate or to approve a candidate or even put one forward, would that end perceptions around public neutrality?
It has happened once in the New Zealand public sector in the early 1990s. We avoid those situations.
The public service has proactively recorded gender and ethnic pay gaps, but the reforms to the Public Service Act will reinforce merit-based appointment. If merit is all that matters, should the public service still record that information?
They record that information for a whole lot of other reasons. Merit is the article of faith. I am confident that all the appointments of chief executives are merit-based. That has never changed.
What are the other reasons they record that information?
It's useful to know what your workforce looks like. I mean, we're trying to create a work environment which is respectful of people. Those things are important. Are they predeterminants of anything? No, but I think they're useful information to have.
But even if it's, surely if you're collecting that information, that is then potentially influencing some of the hiring decisions that you're making. If you're looking to correct what seems like an obvious, points that obviously aren't meeting.
I don't think we're trying to correct any imbalance. We're just trying to get equilibrium, to get perspective, because coupled with merit is perspective. Those two go hand in hand. But, when we make a recommendation on an appointment, we have to know that that is the best candidate for this current job, and I'm confident we do that.
You agreed to be appointed to the role on the basis you could hold on to a small number of private sector board positions, and the Governor-General approved this on the basis the conflicts of interest are appropriately handled. But when perceptions of unfair advantage are so important, why hold on to those positions?
I hold on to them for a number of reasons. One, I'd given my word to certain of those entities that I would continue. That was a precondition of me considering the job. I gave up quite a lot to take on the role, which I was happy to do. Secondly, I believe remaining connected to the productive economy is really important. Your earlier point about Wellington being a bubble, I have to have reason to remain connected to where value is created and where profits are made. So those things are important. But the issues of conflict of interest are top of mind for me and have been since I first worked in the public sector in 1989 for David Longy. I have been in various situations where I have theoretically had access to information. I have never, ever had my integrity questioned, and I will continue to make sure that's the case until I retire.
To talk to us just a bit about that balance, though, because even if there is an advantage to having private sector insights, how can you know if the benefits of that are not outweighed by any enduring perceptions of unfair advantage, even if you manage those conflicts of interest?
Because you get into a black hole of conspiracy on some of that thinking. I am absolutely confident there is no advantage. I'm required under the commitment I've given to the Governor-General and others to honour those, and I will do that. Secondly, trading on inside information is against the law. That is something that I will avoid at all costs. And thirdly, I'm a member of a profession still that requires me to have ethical standards, which I'm obliged to keep. I'm very comfortable with the level of scrutiny that exists around this. It's very transparent, and I am under watch all the time.
You've described yourself as an experiment, a controlled experiment, a catalyst for change. So at the end of your time in this role, what will be materially different in the shape and function of our public service?
The things that I would like to leave behind is a much greater focus on being fit for the future, on having a cadre of chief executives who are energised to create that future and not just respond to it, who have a curiosity about how we can do better and why we need to do better. I think there are a whole lot of things. So some of it's cultural. I'm not looking at sort of major structural things, but I do believe very strongly if we get the right people doing the right thing, we can get great outcomes for New Zealand. And that's what I'm designed to do.